Sure. This evening's program, shall we please be on our feet?
The president, past presidents of the Academy, vice presidents, past vice presidents, fellows of the Academy, honorable ministers, members of Parliament, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, students, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the President and Fellows of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences, I warmly welcome you all to this evening's event. It is a tradition in the Academy and in most institutions of higher learning to give their newly elected members an opportunity to deliver inaugural lectures in their areas of expertise to their colleagues and the general public. This evening, we are privileged to have a scholar speak to us on a very topical subject. The inaugural lecture used to be an in-house program of the Academy, but because of its usefulness to our friends in academia, and indeed the general public, it was made a public lecture in 1998 and has since remained so. At this point, I would like to introduce the chairman for this evening's event, who will take over from me and introduce the speaker. Professor Kofi Opoku-Nti, Vice President of the Arts. Professor Kofi Opoku-Nti is a former Dean of the University of Ghana Business School. He has quite a varied academic background a Bachelor of Science degree in Physics, 1972, a Master of Philosophy degree in Management Science, 1975, and a Doctor of Philosophy degree in Operations, Research, and Economics, 1978, all from Yale University in the United States of America. He has held academic positions in several universities, including Georgia Institute of Technology, Washington University in St. Louis, USA, University of Cologne, Germany, Pennsylvania State University, London School of Economics, and the Chinese University of Hong Kong. He was the first occupant of the Unilever Professorial Chair in Business at the University of Ghana, Legon. Professor Opokunti has extensive and highly technical publications that cover areas such as operations research analysis, management science, applied behavioral science, political economy, economic theory, and production economics. An outstanding scholar and researcher, Professor Opokunti is a member of several academic societies, including Public Choice Society, Institute for Operations, Research, and Management Sciences, and the European Association of Industrial Economists. Professor Opokunti is an expert in the field of game theory and specialized in competition and strategy in business and economics. He is the Vice President of the Arts and a member of the Council of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences, a member of the Presidential Advisory Council of Science, Technology, and Innovation, Director of Universal Hospitals Group, Chairman of Claim Limited, and Chairman and Managing Director of Lemont Foods Limited. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Opokunti, our chairman for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Madam Honorary Secretary. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to today's session by Professor Steve TONAH, William TONAH. This is a very important function where a fellow, a recent fellow, gets a chance to share his craft and skill to tell us what he does, his research, to the other fellows of the academy. It's a glorious occasion, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today, Professor TONAH, to give your inaugural lecture. He's chosen a topic that I believe most of us are familiar with in terms of the news media, in terms of television, in terms of maybe personal stories about the youth crossing the Sahara to go to Libya, sometimes on a route to Europe. So it's something that we are going to get a sociological perspective from our distinguished fellow. I also want to welcome those of you who are online. I was hoping that one day we'll see you projected here so that we can all be a family here. But let me now introduce Professor Steve William TONAH. Professor Steve William TONAH is a professor of sociology in the Department of Sociology, University of Ghana, Legon. He was born on 6th February 1957 in Cape Coast, Ghana. Professor Steve TONAH attended University of Cape Coast and obtained a BA in Economics and Sociology, a Diploma in Education in June 1982, and an MA in Development Planning in Sociology, and a PhD in Development Sociology from the University of Bielefeld, Germany, from January 1989 to April 1993. Professor Steve TONAH has served in various extra academic capacities for institutions, including Program Coordinator, Development Department, Christian Council of Ghana, and Executive Secretary of the Economical Church Loan Fund, Ghana Office, 1997-1998. He also boasts of a rich and progressive career in academia. Some selected positions he has held and teaching activities include Research Fellow, Volta Basin Research Project, University of Ghana, Legon, 1999 to 2004. Lecturer, Department of Sociology, University of Ghana, since 2005. Senior Lecturer, Department of Sociology, University of Ghana, 2003 to 2007. Research Associate, Max Planck Institute for Social Anthropology, Halle, Saal, Germany, 2000 to 2010. Associate Professor, Department of Sociology, University of Ghana, 2007 to 2013. And Professor, Department of Sociology, University of Ghana, since 2013. So Steve TONAH is a meritorious researcher. He's won the Best Researcher with distinction at the University of Ghana in 2009. He has spearheaded leading research projects such as Chieftaincy and Traditional Modes of Governance in Northern Ghana, an ethnographic study of the Mamprasi and the politics of chieftaincy succession in the Wungo, Dagbon, and Nanum areas, with funding from Ghana Sociological and Anthropological Association. 2007 to 2010. Negotiation processes between the state, civil society, organization, and communities in the delivery of public services in Ghana, also funded by the Center for Development Research, ZEF, University of Bonn, Germany. States of work, public service, and civil servants in West Africa. Education and justice in Benin, Ghana, Mali, and Niger, funded by the Volkswagen Foundation. Knowledge for Tomorrow, cooperative research projects in sub-Saharan Africa. He won which was funded to the tune of 515,000 euros in 2007 to 2010. Migrant chiefs in urban Ghana, processes of chieftaincy among migrant groups in urban Accra, funded by the Office of Research, Innovation and Development at the University of Ghana. Mr. TONAH was elected Fellow of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2016, and also holds membership in several national, multinational bodies, including Ghana Sociological Association, International Sociological Association, and the Ghana Association of Writers. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have a very accomplished scholar today who is going to give us some insights into the origins and consequences of the mass migration from West Africa to Libya and Europe, a West African perspective. Professor TONAH, I invite you to the podium.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for those kind words. Good evening to all of you who are present here and those listening to me virtually. The president of the Academy, past presidents of the Academy, vice president, art section, and chairman for today's lecture, fellows of the Academy, colleagues and friends, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to be able to deliver this lecture on the origins and consequences of irregular migration from West Africa to Libya and Europe, a West African perspective. Originally, I was supposed to deliver it last year, but due to the pandemic, it had to be called off. So I'm happy. In this lecture, I intend to provide a short overview on the history of trade and migration from West Africa to North Africa, especially Libya. The transformation of Libya from a destination to a transit country for migrants following the overthrow of the Gaddafi regime, the saga of West African migrants traversing the Mediterranean Sea to Europe. I will then move on to expatiate on the consequences of irregular migration for migrants and their family members left behind. I intend to briefly examine the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on West African migration to Libya, and finally, provide some conclusions and recommendations on the way forward in managing irregular migration to Libya and Europe. Prof. Chairman, the movement of people and goods from West Africa to Libya and other North African countries have for centuries been constrained by the huge and ever-expanding Sahara Desert. Trade and travel between the two regions were mainly done with the use of the camels, and moving goods such as grain, salt, cola nuts, dates, livestock, and other consumer items lasted several weeks before one could cross the Sahara region. Transporting goods was the preserve of the Tuareg, the Maori, the Tubo, the Arabs, and other nomadic groups who had mastered the challenges involved in such long-distance movements across this vast region. The Sahelian countries of Chad, Niger, Mali, Senegal, and Mauritania were for centuries at the crossroads of the trans-Saharan trade between West and North Africa, leading to the rise of famous trading towns such as Timbuktu, Agadez, Gao, Tamarasset, among many others. However, as a result of the colonization of West and North Africa by the English and the French, or rather the Italians in Libya in the late 19th century, most of the economic activities and trade, and with it, the movement of people shifted from North Africa to the coastal countries of West Africa. It was not until the 1960s and 70s, following the commencement of oil production in Algeria and Libya, and the consequent upsurge of economic activities in North Africa, that trade and travel flows from West Africa to the north was revived. The migration of people from West Africa to the north was further accelerated by recurring drought and desertification, as well as the violent conflicts that hit the Sahelian countries in the 1960s and 70s. Libya, in particular, became the main destination of migrants from the Sahel region because of its low population and the demand for skilled and unskilled labor in the services, agricultural, manufacturing, construction, and in the informal sector. Among the first group of migrants to take advantage of the booming economic situation in Libya and Algeria in the 70s were members of the Tuareg, Arab, Tubu, and Berber ethnic groups, whose territories straddle across the borders to North Africa. Most of them worked as artisans and manual laborers, as well as in private businesses. The long and porous border facilitated the movement of persons and goods, both legally and illegally, between West and North Africa. However, migration from the coastal countries of West Africa to Libya did not commence until the early 1980s, following the economic crisis and the consequent decline of the economies of Ghana, Senegal, Nigeria, and Cote d'Ivoire, which until then had received most of the migrants from the sub-region. The expulsion of foreign nationals from Nigeria in the early 1980s and the civil war in Cote d'Ivoire during the 1990s accelerated the movement of West Africans to North Africa, particularly Libya. The primary motive for migrating to Libya was initially as a result of the comparative higher earnings and the availability of jobs in that country. Over time, what can be described as, I quote, a culture of migration or a rite of passage developed among migrants from West Africa, particularly Ghana, Senegal, and Nigeria, where young men had to prove themselves by traveling to Libya. The secondary motives for migrating, which are by no means less important, are as varied as the individuals and the countries from which the migrants originate. The Sahelian countries had to deal with recurrent drought, while many citizens fled from political violence, religious conflicts, civil wars, uprisings, and insurgent groups such as the Tuareg Rebellion, Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb, and other groups. Today, the movement of migrants from West Africa to Libya and Europe is often described as being irregular, clandestine, illegal, or simply undocumented, because these migrants often cross international borders without the required permits. However, as has been observed by several scholars, the reality is often complex. Many stretches on that long and dangerous journey from West Africa to the north are actually legal and regular for migrants from West Africa, while others are not. In any case, the truth of the matter is that West Africans consider the sub-region and neighboring regions as one social unit that they have always traversed without travel documents and border checks. The Tuaregs, Tubu, and Arab people of Niger, Chad, and Mali, whose homelands straddle across the Sahara Desert, have for centuries entered Libya and Algeria without documents or with mere identity cards. The result is that the journey through the desert into Libya and Algeria is organized by structured networks of so-called travel agents and migrant smugglers who know the illegal crossing points through the desert and where and how to bribe police and border personnel working in abandoned and isolated border posts on the routes. The typical migrant from West Africa is a young man between 25 and 35 years and usually married, though there are some singles too. He's most likely an artisan or unskilled laborer, an apprentice or farmer, fisherman, back at home. And most of them have basic or high school education. In actual fact, migration from West Africa has been an overwhelmingly male affair. Only a small number of women make the trip to Libya. The journey is considered to be too dangerous and too risky for a woman, and besides, the men frequently claim that there are no good paying jobs for women in Libya besides prostitution, so they should better stay at home. The decision to travel to Libya is usually taken by the individual migrant after discussion with his peers and one or two extended family members. Spouses and family members known to be against their decision to travel are often kept in the dark until the last moment. Indeed, the decision to travel using the land route often divides the nuclear and extended family, as well as siblings of the migrants, with many opposing the idea while others support it. However, irrespective of whether they are for or against the trip, the journey is typically financed with support from spouses and extended family members. The main migrant routes from West Africa to North Africa go through the strategic towns of Agadez and Alit in Niger, from where the travelers decide to either use the central Mediterranean route that goes through Sabah to Tripoli, or the western Mediterranean route that goes through Tamaracet in Algeria. Very few West Africans use the eastern Mediterranean route that goes through Chad to Sudan. In fact, the central Mediterranean route that passes through Agadez to Sabah in Libya is used by more than 95% of West African migrants. I will therefore focus my attention on events and occurrences on this route and in Libya itself. Prof. Chairman, from the West African perspective, two events that transformed the lives of migrants in Libya were first, the imposition of United Nations Security Council sanctions on the country from 1992 to 2000. And secondly, the overthrow of the Gaddafi regime in 2011 and the civil war that has since then engulfed the country. I will expatiate on these two events and explain how they affected West African migrants in Libya, particularly how the destruction of what was a relatively wealthy and prosperous African nation that for decades served as the main destination for West African migrants was transformed into a war zone, a nightmare place for Black Africans, and a transit zone where migrants embark on the deadly voyage across the Mediterranean Sea to Europe. Let me begin with the United Nations sanctions on Libya and its impact on West Africa migrants. The UN Security Council imposed economic sanctions on Libya for its alleged complicity in the bombings of two airplanes over Lockerbie in 1988 and Niger in 1999, which resulted in the loss of dozens of lives. The impact of the nearly decade-long sanctions on Libya was catastrophic. National revenues fell considerably, and with it, the living conditions of the inhabitants. The air travel ban affected the population, particularly the elite. But it was foreign migrants, especially those from West Africa, that suffered most from the sanctions. According to the official data, the population of migrants in Libya grew steadily from 122,000 in 1970 to more than 508,000 in 1995 and reaching 608,000 by 2010. It is interesting to note that it can be seen from the table that the official population of migrants in Libya has increased consistently since the 1970s, but remained roughly at 10% of the population, even until 2015. However, contrary to official statistics, it is estimated that there were about 2.5 million migrants in Libya by 2010, and not 684,000 as the official statistics indicated. This is because many migrants entered the country illegally and remained unregistered. Therefore, the official figures were a gross underestimation of the population of migrants in Libya. This became evident at the beginning of the civil war in 2011, when about 800,000 migrants were evacuated by the United Nations or fled the country. This included more than 250,000 West Africans who fled Libya using the desert route. The decade-long UN sanctions affected the Libyan economy and society very badly, resulting in the government taking measures to privilege Libyan nationals in employment. To save funds, bilateral contracts between Libya and some West African countries were not renewed. What was of grave concern was the fact that the indigenous Libyans blamed migrants for many of the ills of the society, such as increasing crime and insecurity, health challenges, increasing drugs and prostitution, distillation of alcohol, smuggling, and many other vices. In response to public complaints and pressure, the Libyan government expelled many migrants from West Africa, particularly those without residence permit, and also tightened border controls with neighboring Sahelian countries. Mr. Chairman, even in the best of years, life was by no means easy for West Africans in Libya, but it became increasingly intolerable after the UN sanctions. Black Africans faced discrimination, abuse by their employers, prosecution for engaging in illegal activities, attacks in Tripoli and Zawayi and other towns, and the anti-immigrant riots of 2010 led to the death of 130 migrants in that country. Another significant effect of the UN sanctions was that it heralded the beginning of irregular migrations of West Africans from Libya to Europe across the Mediterranean Sea. With biting United Nations sanctions and increasing preference being given to Libyan nationals in the provision of jobs, West African migrants were among the first to look for other destinations in Europe and elsewhere. Many of them no longer saw any future in Libya and decided to risk the journey to Europe by boat. What initially began as a trickle from Libya to Italy and soon increased in numbers and was quickly transformed into an organized network for smuggling West Africans willing to risk their lives to get to Europe. As if the decades-long UN sanctions on Libya were not bad enough, in 2011, diverse groups took advantage of the disaffection among sections of the Libyan population for the Gaddafi regime and the uprisings that swept through the Arab world to launch an armed insurrection against the Gaddafi government. With massive air support from major Western powers, the insurgents succeeded in overthrowing the government and killing Gaddafi and his associates in October 2011. The civil war, chaos, and mayhem that has since engulfed Libya brought drastic changes in the lives and fortunes of Black Africans, including many migrants in Libya. Indeed, it would not be an exaggeration to say that besides those involved in the fratricidal war itself, as well as the civilian population, migrants from sub-Saharan Africa were amongst those who have borne the brunt of the mayhem and killings that accompanied the overthrow of the Gaddafi regime. 1.5 million migrants from more than 120 countries were repatriated from Libya following the outbreak of war in that country. About 800,000 migrants, including more than 250,000 West Africans, fled Libya. Migrants trapped by fierce fighting had to be evacuated by their respective governments. More than 100,000 Nigerians escaped from Libya, and nearly 20,000 Ghanaians were evacuated from that country by the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. Other West African governments, including Nigeria, Senegal, Chad, and Mali, also organized flights for their stranded citizens. Dozens of West Africans are reported to have died trying to cross the Sahara Desert on their way back home with their belongings. Many others were robbed of their properties and left stranded in the desert. Besides losing their jobs and sources of livelihood in Libya, almost every West African returnee from Libya reported having lost his savings, forfeiture of wages, loss of properties, equipment, businesses, and other valuable items following their hurried and involuntary repatriation from Libya. Sub-Saharan Africans who could not leave Libya were targeted and detained by the rebel militia for allegedly supporting and fighting as mercenaries for the Gaddafi regime. Other migrants have been subjected to attacks, abuse, robberies, forced labor, torture, sexual abuse, extortions, and slavery. A recent CNN documentary on West Africans being sold in slave markets in Libya has only revealed some of the atrocities that migrants have faced in that country since 2011. Given these atrocities, the trickle of Africans to Europe that commenced from 2001 surged. Libya was quickly transformed from a final destination for many West Africans into a transit point to get to Europe. In 2010, for example, only 58,000 West Africans undertook the dangerous journey across the Mediterranean Sea to Europe. This number increased sharply to about 139,000 in 2014. The figure rose again to 168,000 in 2017. However, the number of irregular migrants to Europe started decreasing following the accord between Libya and the European Union, as well as some member states such as Italy. Thus, from its peak in 2017, the population of West African migrants attempting the sea voyage consequently decreased to 23,000 in 2018, 11,000 in 2019, 7,200 in 2020. Most of these African migrants were from Nigeria, Gambia, Guinea, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Senegal, and Ivory Coast. Mr. Chairman, the Mediterranean Sea has become a big cemetery for Africans. Africans constituted about a third of all persons found dead while crossing over to Europe, although its share of the migrant population was only about 10%. The reasons for this are not far-fetched. Most African migrants use the central Mediterranean route that leads directly through Sabah to Tripoli, which is not only the longest amongst the three available routes if you want to cross to Europe, but it's also because of the rickety nature of the vehicles and dinghies used in crossing the sea. From a peak of 1,140 deaths in 2015, the figure decreased to 121 in 2010. It rose again slightly to 466 deaths in 2020. Between January and March this year, 2021, 232 Africans have already died crossing the Mediterranean Sea to Europe. Although the number of Africans crossing the sea has fallen drastically since its peak in 2017, following the EU policy of forced repatriation of migrant boats intercepted on the sea by either the European or the Libyan coast guards. Migrants handed over to the Libyan coast guards by their European counterparts, or those who are, quote unquote, forcefully rescued, are usually sent to detention centers in Libya, where they face beatings, abuses, deprivations, and deportations. And if you haven't seen a detention center, this is how they look like. Mr. Chairman, today, in spite of these atrocities, there are still about 650,000 migrants, mostly Africans, resident in Libya. The top 5 nationalities are those from Niger, 136,000, Chad, 103,000, Egypt, 100,000, Sudan, 77,000 migrants, and Nigeria, 50,000. The number of Ghanaians in Libya is estimated at about 20,000 persons. In spite of the daily horrors we hear about Libya, life continues in that country under the control of different militias and ethnic groups and their leaders. In fact, there are not only two governments in Libya, as the international media want us to believe. This is because most of them enter the country through airports. But there are at least 5 governments, in quotes, controlling different parts of Libya. This is the reality that Africans who enter that country using the desert face. They have to go through areas controlled by the Tuareg militia, the Tubu militia, and the Arab Berber militias. And these are vast regions because the desert is so huge and they control different parts of the desert. Prof. Chair, I will now briefly examine the consequences of irregular migration for West African migrants and their family members left behind, the impact of COVID-19 on West African migration to Libya and Europe, and highlight a few conclusions and recommendations. The migration of West African migrants to Libya and Europe is often a mixed blessing to the migrants, their spouses, children, and extended family members left at home. The departure of a family member on an irregular trip to Libya using the land route is initially accompanied by fear and disbelief on the part of family members who disagreed with the decision to go to Libya in the first place, and those who were kept in the dark about the impending journey. This condition of fear and anxiety continues until the migrant completes his journey to Libya and calls home, or when any returned migrants who might have seen him during the journey inform their relatives of his whereabouts. The journey to Libya can take between 1 and 4 weeks. During this period, family members at home live on tenterhooks. Fear, anxiety, sleeplessness, and worries are the lot of wives and siblings of many migrants. They have heard too many stories about migrants dying in the desert or on the sea. The departure of a family member is therefore often accompanied by intensive prayer sessions and fasting for the journey to be successful. This continues secretly or openly until they get a message that their son is alive, or if it is bad, dead, and has arrived safely in Libya. It is not uncommon for migrants en route to Libya to call home, requesting for additional funds as they face robbers, extortionists, and corrupt border personnel. The journey across the Sahara Desert itself can be deadly, especially when they miss their way in the sandy landscape and ultimately run out of water, food, or fuel. I will now expatiate a little bit on some of the benefits that family members get. Generally, most West African migrants recount positive experiences about their stay in Libya, particularly during the era of Muammar Gaddafi, that is until 2011. As work was easy to find, and they felt relatively safe in that country. Wages were said to be far higher in Libya than they obtained in their origin countries. Water, electricity, food, that is lunch, and even accommodation were sometimes provided free of charge by the employer. Generally, Libya was considered in those days to be an affordable non-bureaucratic, and accessible destination to many West Africans. The most widely mentioned benefit was with respect to remittances that migrants sent to their spouses and extended family members, even if these remittances tended to be irregular. Besides meeting the subsistence needs of the family, the remittances were typically used to meet their health challenges, finance the education of their children, pay for wedding and funeral celebration of extended family members, and so on. Having a relative abroad brings not only financial relief, but also prestige in the society. Such benefits accrue not only to the wives of migrants, but the entire extended family, especially their parents and siblings back home. Indeed, persons who have spouses or children abroad are presumed to be wealthy and held in high esteem by community members, even if they have not received any remittances whatsoever from their relatives abroad. A young man in Chiema, in the Borno region, whose brother had traveled to Libya, told us that, and I quote, "My brother's wife is part of the Burgers Wives Association. If you have a funeral and they come, they can each donate between 50 and to about 150 cedis. There is so much respect that I even have from my friends as a brother to a burger. When my brother sends me money and I'm going to the bank for the money, my friends begin to flow me with funds. Even at the church, the pastor respects us. My brother sends money for harvest. My pastor comes to visit us in our house a lot, because when visitors come from Kumasi or Sunyani to lead programs at the church, they sleep in the house that my brother has built with his money from Libya." Another respondent from Busunya, also in the Borno region, who had two of his sons and a brother abroad, had this to say. Again, I quote, "When I meet my friends, they tell me I have done very well by supporting my sons to Libya so that they can travel to abroad, that is overseas. When we go anywhere, like to funerals, and they are introducing me, they tell the people that I have two sons and I have helped them travel to Libya so that they can go abroad. People respect me because my own junior brother too was financed by me in those days. Now he's in Holland. My brother respects me a lot. He even made me marry for him. Whatever I say, he does it, even more than what his wife says. He tells everybody from Busunya he meets in Holland to greet me when they come to Ghana. I feel proud about this. People come to me and ask how they can also travel, although me, myself, I have not traveled outside before," unquote. Despite these individual perspectives, life is not all easygoing for many family members left behind. Some family members did not benefit from their son's stay in Libya and Europe. They did not receive any remittances, but rather had to hire the services of laborers to work on their farms. Furthermore, managing family life as single parents is a huge challenge for many wives and children left behind, and invariably, they and their children suffer most. Some left behind wives had to seek assistance from their relatives and friends, especially when expected remittances are not coming. In such circumstances, the women have to do extra work to increase their income to be able to care for their families. It is not uncommon for some women to use unconventional means, such as having extramarital affairs or engaging in prostitution, just to be able to care for their children and relatives and maintain their status as bogus wives. Many women also told us about instances where their husbands had remarried abroad, ostensibly to obtain their residence permits, with or without the knowledge of their wives and families back at home. Then there is also the issue of loneliness, particularly on the part of wives left behind. Women living in compound houses or among extended family members do tend to get personal and emotional support and cope better with the absence of their husbands than those living in single bungalow houses. In recent years, the widespread availability of social media has facilitated contacts with migrants abroad and somewhat attenuated the level of loneliness amongst many wives. Prof. Chair, I now move on to the impact of COVID-19 on irregular migration. We are still in the midst of the COVID pandemic, and the trajectories of the disease is still unfolding. However, we can say for sure that it has affected the nature of irregular migration to Libya and Europe, and the lives and livelihoods of migrants in multiple ways. In West Africa, just as elsewhere in the world, some of the responses of governments to the COVID-19 pandemic have included the closure of land borders and limiting entry exclusively to designated airports, the imposition of travel restrictions and movements, and stringent health screening programs, among others. There were no large-scale return of migrants from Libya and Europe to their origin countries. Neither did we witness large-scale voluntary returns, nor special flights to early citizens' home. However, there were stranded migrants at different locations in the sub-region during the early phase of the pandemic. What was widely observed, though, was that as the pandemic spread and governments began closing their borders, many West African migrants in Libya decided on their preferred places to be locked down. Those who had lost their jobs or did not have any sustainable means of livelihood packed their bags and baggages and headed home using the land route from Libya. Irrespective of whether they stayed in Libya or returned home, the effects of the pandemic on migrants have been quite profound. These include the loss of jobs or reduced earnings for migrants abroad due to the frequent lockdowns and accompanying closure of many workplaces. Migrants who were self-employed, as well as those working in the construction, agro-processing, packaging and delivery services, were the worst affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has also reduced the earnings of most migrants in Libya, and by implication, the level and frequency of sending remittances home. Ongoing investment projects at home have been halted temporarily. Visits home that usually occurred during Christmas and the Ramadan period were either postponed or cancelled altogether last year. The implications of these changes for spouses, children, and other family members left behind are immense. However, in spite of the pandemic, migrants, especially those who are conversant with the route, continue to travel from West Africa to Libya today, albeit in much smaller numbers. I now come to the conclusions and recommendations. In this lecture, I have shown that the recent migration of West Africans to Libya date back to the 1970s, when that country started the exploration of oil and gas in commercial quantities. Given its low population in comparison with its huge land size and economy, Libya continues to attract migrants, making it a major destination for migrant labor, refugees, and asylum seekers from across Africa. The proximity of Libya to West Africa and its accessibility by land, even without official travel documents, made that country an attractive destination. The numerous violent conflicts, insurgencies, ecological and environmental disasters in the West African sub-region has also engendered irregular migration to Libya and Europe. This is in spite of the hardships and atrocities that they face in that country. I did also indicate that the civil war and insecurity that accompanied the overthrow of Gaddafi has robbed West Africa of a major destination for work, income, and a source of remittances for migrants and their families back home. The attacks, detentions, and cruelty against migrants and refugees in Libya has transformed that country from a major destination to a transit country for migrants trying to get to safer and prosperous locations in Europe. Associated with this perilous journey across the Mediterranean is the organized criminality, exploitation, and the high number of fatalities among those risking their lives to get to Europe. PROF Chairman, irregular migration brings several positive benefits to family members left behind in terms of remittances for subsistence, housing, education, health needs, as well as the associated prestige. However, it has a very negative impact on the social and family lives of spouses and relatives left behind. It has resulted in needless deaths of migrants who are the main income earners, labor shortages at home, loneliness, anxiety among family members, and destabilizing families and breaking down marriages. The COVID-19 pandemic has also affected the lives and livelihoods of West African migrants and their families left behind. Travels to and from Libya have been severely curtailed, while income levels and remittances at home by migrants have reduced considerably or stalled altogether. In the light of this situation, I wish to make the following recommendations. Let me start by saying that, as I indicated in the study, the decision to travel to Libya is a personal and individual decision, sometimes taken even in spite of the reservations of family members. Most of the migrants that we talk to are very much aware of the risks and the dangers associated with traveling through the desert, as well as risking the going over the Mediterranean Sea. Nevertheless, probably due to the culture of migration or the belief that If I will make it, I will surely make it. Those who will not make it will not make it. So this fatality still encourages many young people to travel to Libya and Europe using the Mediterranean Sea. In that sense, I would say that the pros and cons of traveling to Libya by the land route are very clear to individual migrants. It is a risky, but a risk that they are happy to take. I will make some recommendations targeted more at what governments and regional organizations can do. Governments and regional organizations in West Africa should take interest in ending the civil war and restoring national authority, law, and order in Libya. Stable and secure borders to North African countries, particularly Libya, would deprive the numerous insurgent groups in West Africa of their hideouts and recruiting grounds and attenuate the conflicts and civil war in the Sahelian countries. It would also make traveling to Libya less hazardous. Secondly, the economic community of West African states and individual governments should enter into agreement with the Maghreb countries, particularly Libya, to promote trade, safe and visa-free travel and exchanges across the Sahara. Instead of leaving this endeavor to Europeans who destroyed Libya in the first place to deal with exclusively. Engaging the North African countries will regularize and improve the safety of travel by land between West and North Africa and reduce the migrant smuggling, atrocities, and other illegalities associated with traveling to Libya. Finally, to stop the business of migrant smuggling across the Mediterranean and its attendant's death, West African governments should negotiate with individual EU member countries a scheme that allows migrants to legally work in Europe on a short-term, secular contract basis. This should complement efforts by governments at creating jobs at home and reduce the need to go abroad. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. I now call on the chairman for this evening, Professor Kofi Opokunti, to give his closing remarks. Thank you.
Professor TONAH, thank you very much for a very well laid out program on the migration, the irregular migration to Libya and beyond. Please, let's give him another hand for Professor TONAH has met one of the conditions of being a fellow. He's given his inaugural address, so I congratulate you. This is a very fascinating phenomenon, the idea that people leave from West Africa to Libya under very risky conditions, and sometimes to continue to Europe. So there's a very nuanced discussion was given to us as to the factors that govern or promote this migration. And he has helped us to understand that the decision to make this move is primarily an individual decision. So it's an individual risk-taking decision, measuring the risk-reward trade-off and the risk tolerance of the various participants. I have met a young man who went to Libya, and I tried to understand how he left Kumasi area, found his way to Brongahafo, and then crossed across to Burkina, and I guess he probably took the route that went to Agadez. I wonder, but I didn't know enough to question how he did it. But I found it quite fascinating that young people will go out and hear that there's something out there in Libya, especially when the conditions were very favorable, and would go there and work and make remittances and come to their families back in Ghana or Nigeria or Niger and other places. What Professor TONAH has done is to shed light on how the deteriorating conditions in Libya impacted this phenomenon of people moving to Libya to settle or to work temporarily and to come back, but now using as a transit point to go to Europe. We've heard stories about the dangers they have used and the tremendous loss of life that occurred along the route. But it's still an individual decision making. And Professor TONAH has tried to place this in the context of policy by making some recommendations that the ECOWAS communities can adopt to help curtail the riskiness of the venture. But it's still a very much a high risk, but maybe low reward venture. So it takes the very bold, the most daring to do that kind of trip. So we thank Professor TONAH for shedding light on the irregular migration from West Africa to Libya and Europe. Thank you very much, Professor TONAH.
Thank you, Professor Okunti, for these remarks. We have come to the end of this evening's lecture, but before we leave, there are a few announcements I'd like to make. First, some upcoming inaugural lectures. On April 29th, 2021, Professor Ahmad de Graft Aikens, a fellow of the Academy, will give her inaugural lecture on the topic, Laughing, Singing, Dancing for Health, Creative Arts and the Science of Health Communication in Ghana. The lecture will take place in this auditorium at 5:30 p.m. Then on 6 May 2021, Professor J. Kwabena Asamoah-Gyedu, a fellow of the Academy, will give an annual lecture in the humanities on the topic, Divinity and Epidemiology, Religion and Public Health in the History of Pandemics in Africa, 1918 to 2020. The lecture will be delivered here in this auditorium at 5:30 p.m. And then on the 13th of May, 2021, Professor P.K. Boa-Baswa, a fellow of the Academy, will give the Ephraim Amu Memorial Lecture on the topic, Unlocking Music Mirage, Inspiration from Ephraim Amu's Musicology. The lecture will be delivered here in the auditorium at 5:30 p.m. And now on housekeeping, there is refreshment right outside this auditorium, opposite the car park. Please get some food and drink as you leave this place. Thank you very much. At this time, the lecturer and the chairman will leave the hall, and then the rest of you will follow. Thank you.